Hey folks, thanks for checking out this intro video for the ND Blender add-on. So the purpose of this video is to briefly explain how to use the add-on and demonstrate some of its features. This won't be a comprehensive tutorial, as I'll instead create shorter videos going through each feature in detail, which should be available in the next few weeks or perhaps even be available already depending on when you're watching this video. So I could go into great detail as to what non-destructive is in the context of 3D modeling, which by the way is what the ND stands for. But instead, I'm simply going to show you an example which should, explain it in a simple way, as well as give me an opportunity to show you how to use the add-on. So what I have in front of me right now is just a simple 2D plane. Um, and I'm just going to use this as an initial example just to show you some of the UI and the operators that come with ND. So assuming you've, downloaded ND from Gumroad or whichever other provider it's available on, just install it like you would install any normal Blender add-on. And if you're not sure how to do that, there's tons of tutorials on the web as to how to do that. I'm going to assume you have it installed. So to ensure you definitely have it installed, you can confirm that by opening up the N panel UI. So if you hit the N key, you should have this little sidebar that pops up where you can get access to sort of the item menu, the tool menu, view menu, etc. So you should see a label here called Huge Menace, and under that you should see ND with a version number, core, and ND utils. So if you can see this, it means everything's cool. You've got it installed and it's working. All right, so that's the first way we access ND. Now there's a second way as well, and that's through sort of the shortcut menu. So by default, this is bound to Shift 2, so the Shift key and the number 2. So if you press that, you'll see this little menu come up. Now, of course, Shift 2 isn't set in stone. If you want to, change that key binding, just simply go to your Blender preferences, go to key binding, find Shift plus 2, and just override this shortcut key with whatever you want. Cool. So I usually like to work with a bit more screen real estate. So I'm going to close the N menu panel there and just use the shortcut menu from here on out. All right. So just to give you a quick example, if we select this 2D plane and I hit Shift 2 and I select one of the modifiers here. So ND is sort of broken up into sort of 3 core areas. So there's an area what we sort of refer to as sketching. And we'll go through an example of that in a second. Then there's modifiers, and then there's generators. There's also some small utilities sort of hidden behind the secondary menu here, and we'll probably go through that sort of in a separate video. But for now, though, I'm going to select one of these modifiers called Solidify. So if I click on that, you'll immediately notice a couple of things happen. So first of all, our 2D flat plane now looks like it's got a bit of 3D volume to it, as well as there's a sort of like this floating UI that's following the mouse around. So with ND, all of our interactive operators have this menu that shows up, and it will follow your mouse around, so it's always front and center, and you can see which operator you're working with and which option you're changing. If it does get annoying, you don't want it to follow your mouse around while you got an operator active, you can just hover anywhere you want on the screen and hit the P key to pin the menu. The overlay, and that'll just keep it sort of in one spot and let you sort of move around without it following the mouse. All right, so and you can again just hit the P key again to unpin it. So, all right, I'll explain some of the stuff we see here. So first of all, we have the title of the operator, so ND, and the specific title is Solidify, and then we've got a number of options here. So the first option we have is thickness, the second is the weighting, and the third is the offset. Now we can see which operator option is active at any point in time by looking at the dots to the left of them. So if you see a gray dot, it means that particular option is inactive at the moment, and the one with the blue dot is currently the active one. So whenever you see an active option selected, you can simply scroll the mouse wheel to change its value. So we decided to use the scroller because you can, if you've got a clicky scroll wheel or one that you can smooth scroll, you can sort of dial in some more precise, incremental steps. And those are also determined by the current step setting. So underneath the option name, you can see there's a ±10 and a shift key, which does it in ±1 increments. So If we don't hold down the shift key, but simply just scroll our mouse wheel, we're going up and down by sort of 10 units at a time. But if I click and hold the shift key down, you can see that this little blue circle sort of turns into a half filled blue circle, telling us that we're now sort of in this option sort of more precision or precise mode. So with the shift key held down, you can see now we can sort of go up and down by, one unit at a time. Now, if you want to go in slightly larger increments or even slightly smaller increments, whenever you have an option active, you can also hit the plus button on the numpad to jump up by a factor of 10, or the minus button to jump down by a factor of 10. So you can hit it a few times to go, quite large or quite small. So obviously if we go down to the lowest setting, then the shift key is going in 0.1 increments, which is really fine grain. Or if we go all the way up to the top and just sort of let go of the shift key, we can sort of do some crazy step sizes there. So I'm going to go down a few steps back to 10 and then just sort of, I don't know, dial in a thickness of, say, 150 units. Cool. So the next option we have here is the weighting. Now, it's not currently active, but the way we activate it is simply by holding down the key that's labeled here. So if we see it's got the Alt key, so if we hold down Alt, you'll see how the blue dot jumps down to weighting, meaning that that is now active. So while I'm holding down the Alt key, I can then scroll the mouse wheel again and jump between the different, available values. So we have positive, neutral, and negative. And this is just sort of showing you that this is doing solidification either in a positive direction in a neutral, so going equal distance above and below, or negative, which is all below. The third option we have here is offset. So if we hold down the control key, then we can sort of dial in a sort of an offset amount as well. So yeah, that's basically how the operators and the UI works in ND. Now, there's also a third sort of, well, actually, there's two extra modes that we can get into as well. So one additional mode is if we hit the backspace key. So I guess on a standard English layout keyboard, so US keyboard, it's the key that's underneath the backspace key and above the enter key. So the backslash key is the one you want to be pressing. If you click that, you'll see we go into a paused mode. Now, paused mode is interesting because what it does is actually sort of put the operator into the background and allows sort of all the normal keyboard and mouse events to get fed through to Blender directly, which is great if you want to sort of zoom in and out in the viewport, move yourself around, and not sort of affect or have the operator change values while you scroll. And if you hit the backslash key again, you can jump out of pause mode. And then if you start scrolling again, then you're sort of affecting the values themselves. All right, so when you're ready to commit these settings, you simply just left click to sort of dismiss the operator, and it will sort of leave you in whatever state you selected. Now, if we select something that has had some operator applied to it, now there's only a certain number of operators that you can do this on. But for instance, if we bring up the menu again and select solidify on an object that was previously solidified, we go into something which is called recall mode. So recall mode actually just reads out to the current or previous settings you had, so you can quickly dial in or change the settings. And the reason that all of this is possible is because what we're doing is really just using modifiers to affect the geometry. So, if you wanted to ignore, the UI for a second and just come straight into the modify stack yourself, you could just come in here and actually change these values at any point in time. And this starts to show you, I guess, a little bit of an example of what non-destructive really means. So it's giving you the opportunity to change your mind and to make edits quite easily at any point in time without having to go in and sort of do manual poly modeling. The cool thing about the recall as well is even if we change this value in here and then we recall it, it's reading that exact same value off the modify stack. So they always stay in sync, and you sort of get the choice to either use the floating UI, or you can just, if you're a more advanced user, you can jump into the modifier stack and do changes there as well. Cool. All right. So that's a bit of an example of how we sort of, start using a particular operator and what the UI looks like. So I'm going to show just a little bit of a sort of general workflow that one might follow. So I'm just going to sort of go into the front view here. And I'm going to bring up a new operator now called blank sketch. So this is from our sketch section here at the top. So if we select blank sketch, what this does is put a single vertex at the 3D cursor, and then sort of has, puts you into this operating mode. So what I'm going to do here is sort of put my mouse off to the side, pin this operator, and also put it into pause mode by hitting the backslash key. And with that done, I'm going to basically, with this vertex selected, hit E to extrude it, and I'm just going to hold down Control so I can enable snapping. Click here, extrude it again, bring it up over here, extrude it one more time, and sorry, I'll do one more time over here as well. Cool. So with that in place, I'm going to be using this as a 2D profile. So what I want to do is now unpause the operator, and I'll unpin it so it comes back following the mouse. I'm going to also hold down the Alt key and just change this manifold option to no, because I don't want it to, basically if manifold is turned on, it would automatically connect the first and the last vertex together and fill in the face, sort of to create a manifold mesh. However, I just want to use this as a profile, so I'm going to leave manifold turned off. Now with this operator, because you're normally using the left mouse button to sort of move things around, we've changed the mode to basically confirm you have to hit the spacebar. So if we hit the spacebar, you'll see it disappears, and we're kind of left with our, set of edges here that we've created. All right, so with these edges in place, what I'm going to do now is hit Shift 2 and bring up something called the Profile Extrude operator. So if we click on that, you'll see, first of all, this appears initially, but if I start scrolling increasing the extrusion width, and also change the axis to Y, you can see we sort of, can change this value here and sort of extrude that 2D profile into sort of a 3D shape. So I'm going to extrude it about that far, and then I'm also going to apply some solidification to this. So that's a bit too big there, so let's scroll this down, maybe to a size of about, 3. Cool, so there we go. We got sort of a bit of a hard surface, maybe 1/2 of a bracket. So one thing I want to do now as well, I want to actually punch a hole straight through this face over here. Now, because this is non-destructive, so again, let me show you what I mean by that. So if we come to the modifier stack here and turn off all modifiers, the visibility in the viewport, all we have in terms of basic raw geometry is a bunch of edges. But using modifiers, we've sort of turned it into this. So if we try and jump into edit mode to select this face, well, it can't be done because all we have is literally the edges. So if I want to punch a hole through that face, the only way I can do that, sort of more traditionally, would be to apply all of my modifiers or create a duplicate of this, apply all the modifiers, select the face, delete the duplicate. Anyway, it's a long process. So what we've done is sort of added a special option in here called View Align and Geo Lift. So the thing I want to use right now is View Align. So while I have this object selected, I'm going to go to View Align, and this will actually allow me to select this face from a non-destructive piece of geometry. So, in this mode as well, you can see there's a couple of different selection types. If we hold down the Alt key, we can scroll through face, vertex, and edge. We can also hit the standard edit mode shortcuts 1, 2, and 3 to sort of swap those, cycle through those as well. So anyway, I'm going to select this face and then hit the spacebar to confirm. Now, what's happened is it's basically taken the viewport camera and sort of altered it to look directly at that face. It's also put the 3D cursor directly on that face as well and rotated it so it's sort of taking into account the face normal. And it also set up a custom transform orientation for us. But anyway, with that in place, I'm going to hit Shift 2 and I'm going to use this thing called Recon Poly. So it's pretty big to start with, so I'm just going to scroll down and change the radius to about something like this. Now, Recon Poly is just basically a generator that creates regular convex polygons, so things like triangles, squares, hexagons, octagons, and so forth. So I'm going to scroll this up to about maybe, I don't know, a value of 32, and I think we might change the radius a little bit more as well. Anyway, I won't go into great detail with this operator because, again, I'll make separate videos. I'm sort of going through these different operators in a bit more detail. So we start with that, and I'm just going to click to confirm. Now, if I jump out of this view and go back to looking at this object from a better perspective, with that selected, I'm going to go and use the solidify modifier again. Thickness is a little bit too big, so I'm going to bring that down a bit. And I want to make sure this is sort of, going right through the mesh. So I'm going to change the weighting to negative, make sure I can see it poking out the back, and then also increase the offset just a little bit so it's sort of completely intersecting with this mesh here. Cool. So I'm going to select this and then select our target mesh. I'm going to hit Shift 2, then go to Booleans and select difference. So this will basically apply a difference Boolean to our target object using the reference as sort of the cutting object. This does a few things. It parents the cutting object or the reference object to the target object, and it also adds the name bool in front of it. So in the scene view here, you can quite easily identify, which objects are sort of reference bool objects as well. Anyway, with that in place, I'm just going to hide that. And you can see, all right, we're getting somewhere. So we got this sort of random bracket looking thing, and we got a hole punched out over there. So I think one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select this object. This time use geo lift, and I'm going to select this face over here, and then hit the space bar, which will actually give me access to that face. Again, being able to select that from non-destructive geometry. I'm going to go into edit mode, go into face mode, and then just do a simple face inset, probably about that far. Then I'm going to invert my selection and then just delete the outside faces. So I'm just left with this sort of face inset a little bit from the original. I'll jump to vertex mode now, and I'm going to use something called vertex bevel. So with that selected, I'm going to hit the Alt key and sort of add some width. I might dial this back just a little bit and then add some segments. So maybe let's go with 6 segments. All right, with that in place, we can see we sort of have this sort of nice rounded square here at the moment. So let's go ahead and add a solidify to that too. I'm just going to change the thickness, adjust the weighting, and then sort of have this push out a little bit so it's completely intersecting. And then just again, I'm going to use a difference Boolean and then hide that. So, right, making some more progress. So one thing we can do now is like, okay, well, let's say this is maybe 1/2 of a bracket. Now let's run the mirror operator to create the other half. So again, making progress. I'm not going to go too far with this, but let's just do one more thing quickly, and that's to add maybe a weighted normal bevel. I'm going to dial this right back to about maybe, let's see, about 0.2 looks good. I'm just going to clean the viewport up just a little bit so we can see this. So, I mean, here's what we have. So this is a pretty interesting looking, maybe hard surface bracket of sorts, but I think what's really interesting, and this is again, if you're not familiar with non-destructive modeling, is we haven't actually done any traditional poly modeling to get to this point. As you can see, it's just basically a whole stack of modifiers doing all the work for us. So if we turn these off, you can see all the base geometry is really just a set of edges. And obviously, if we unhide our Boolean cutters, let's just select everything again. Turn off all the modifiers, you can see realistically all we have is basically a couple of planes and some edges, and with all those modifiers applied, we get a pretty interesting and you can get some pretty complicated stuff going just simply using modifiers. So that's really cool. And obviously this is all stuff you can do in vanilla Blender, but it just takes a lot of sort of time and effort trying to add all these modifiers manually, remember all the different steps. So with using ND, it just helps to optimize and speed up this entire workflow. Cool. Yeah, and so I think I'll leave it at that. Obviously, there's a lot more that this plugin does. And like I said, we'll probably have a separate video dedicated to each feature, going through, explaining what it is, going through some use cases and whatnot. So if you don't already have ND, you can grab it from the Gumroad page, and I'll add the link in the description below. And if you don't want to wait until I've created the videos on every single feature, you can go over to the documentation, and we have all of the features listed out here so far. So you can click through, see a description of the operator, an example of its use case, and all the different options that it supports. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. Like, a lots more ideas in mind, and again, very open to feedback and suggestions as well. So we're still in the early days. I think there's a lot we can do with this add-on. And yeah, look forward to hearing what you guys think. So, yep, have fun and happy modeling.